All right. So, good morning and welcome back to this online summer workshop. If you are joining on the second day, or welcome if you're this is going to be your first session, and welcome on behalf of my colleagues at the Bhopal campus of Azim Premji University. I think they are the brains behind this. So all credit goes to them for lining up this 4 exciting days for school students. And we have some 9 sessions packed for you. We did 2 yesterday and we are into the third one. And to introduce myself, I'm Rajgopal. I coordinate outreach for Azim Premji University. And as I said yesterday, what we thought around 50 students would join, it's across century, right? There's more than 100 listening to us. So thank you for students who have joined. And yesterday somebody asked, what is the idea of the session? In Hindi, somebody asked, why? The idea is very simple. I'm repeating what I said yesterday. I think there's somewhere by the time you reach 9th, 10th standard, your relationship with the school subjects, sometimes you like some school subjects, some you don't like some school subjects. We want you to enjoy all the school subjects equally. How can we as a university help you have a better, friendly relationship with your school subjects, right? So that's number one. That's the first idea. And because it's biology, we should not think biology is only about human physiology and wanting to prepare to become a doctor. Of course, we need doctors, but how do you look at biology in a much more broader sense from looking at, say, the ecosystems also, right? That's one. Second is, very rarely when I was a school student, I got an opportunity to interact with a university professor and faculty, right? So second is that you get to listen to them. You can understand how they would look at a school subject, what they call a discipline, right? Biology has got concepts, frameworks. So that's the second thing. The third is, we did this in-person workshops at Bhopal, and we thought, why should only Bhopal students have the fun? How do we take it pan-India, right? So that's the third idea behind this workshop. And as I said yesterday, what will really help you is not for the quiz in the end. Have a pen and a paper, or a notebook, note down what's going on, what we're speaking. You may want to read about that further. And yes, that's some housekeeping stuff, is that stay yourself on mute. You'll have ample time for questions, and we have packed it in such a way that after the session by my colleague Achyut, we will have time for questions. And on that introduction, I'm going to request my colleague Achyut Banerjee to take stage. I'm calling them by name, but they're all qualified academics. I would leave him to do his introduction and take it from here. Achyut, hope you can share the screen. That's enabled if you're sharing a PPT.
Yeah. Thanks, Rajagopal.
Thank you. Over to you. Yes.
Thank you. Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay. Am I mute?
No. Yeah, no.
Whatever, right? Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Rajagopal, for such a nice introduction. So my name is Achyut, and I will take the first session today of the biology workshop in the summer workshop program. So we have two very exciting sessions today. The first one is on aliens, and the second one is on hybrids that my colleague Alok will take. So my name is Achyut, and I teach biology here at Azim Premji University, Bhopal campus. So my introduction may come later. You can ask me if you want to know more about me, but I think this session, maybe we can focus more on the alien species. So we all know about the term alien. So the thing that comes from outside our world, outside our environment. So someone from outside. But in this session, I will introduce some of the species that are aliens but still live among us. So how many of you are here with the biology background? Since you are attending the biology session, I think most of you are from the biology background. So we will talk about two things today. The first one is the biology and the second one is about ecology. So the logy is common, that means science of telling something. So the two terms, biology and ecology. So biology means when we talk about just one organism, one tree, one particular plant, one animal. So that is biology. Ecology, when we talk about ecology, ecology is basically environment. That means a particular species, a particular plant, a particular animal, when it resides in an environment and interacts with all others. That particular discipline is usually called ecology. So ecology is basically a relationship between living organisms, including us as the human species, and their physical environment. So in the physical environment, there could be, if I am a human, so it could be some animals, it could be some other animals, some plants, some microbes, anything. So all the physical environment and their relationship with me is usually covered under the discipline of ecology. It's a sub-discipline of biology, but nowadays, ecology has itself become a major discipline. Now, why do we study ecology? Ecology is basically studied to make sense of the world around us. And so as we are interacting with our environment every day, every moment of our life, so if we understand them better, so that means we are making sense of the world around us and how it can help us. It may help us to improve our environment. It may help us to manage our natural resources, and it may protect human health. Are we taking questions between session? Yeah. Yeah, Kamran. You raised hand.
I think we'll take questions towards the end. If you have any questions, you should
Okay.
only sound
Okay.
is working fine. Kamran, sound is absolutely fine. You should check your speaker. Continue, Achyut.
Yeah, thank you. So, as I was saying, that we study ecology to make sense of the world around us and how it can help us. It may improve our environment. The knowledge may help us to manage our natural resources as well as protect our own health. Not only our own health, but the health of other organisms that live with us. Now, when we talk about ecology and environment, there are five biggest threats that our environment is facing nowadays. We all know, more or less know about this, at least superficially. For example, climate change. It's a hot topic. It is impacting our environment heavily. Then change in land use. That means we are changing our land, maybe an agricultural land, it becomes something else. So that is change in land use. Species over exploitation. We do too much fishing, for example. So that is called species over exploitation. Pollution. We all know about pollution. That is also impacting our environment. And finally, what is the invasive species? So today's session, we will talk about that particular threat to our environment. As you can see from the numbers here, so species overexploitation like contributes to 24% threat. Land use change, 50% threat. Climate change, 6%. Pollution, 7%. But this invasive species, they contribute around 13% contribution to the environment threats that our environment is facing right now. So what are these invasive species? What does this terminology mean? That we will try to understand in today's session. Now, let's start from very basics. So when we see this particular picture, there are certain big trees, small trees like here, and some very small flowers. There are grasses. This is another kind of plant. So there are different kinds of plants or different kinds of species present in this picture. But it may happen that some species do not actually belong here. For example, I am from Calcutta, but right now I am living in Bhopal. So I actually do not belong here, my native place, or I am originally from Calcutta. So similarly, in this picture, maybe this particular flower doesn't belong here. It may have been introduced or someone bring it here from outside. So is it clear that some species do not belong here originally? So we call them non-native species. Native means which originally belonged somewhere. Non-native means which was introduced from somewhere else. So we call them non-native species. So this is an AI generated photograph of white crow among very many black crows. This is simple AI generated because there is no such thing as white crow. But the concept should be clear that what is a non-native species. Non-native species means the species which have been introduced from outside. So in today's session, we will talk about four things. What are the non-native species? Why we should care about them? When we should care? And how we can care? So there will be four questions. What, why, when, how. So let's deal with the first question. What they are. So what are the alien species or invasive species? So as I said, anything that came from outside. So we woke up in the morning, the first thing we take tea or coffee. Both these things come from outside. For example, coffee. It's actually from Ethiopia, an African country, Ethiopia. Then it started moving through humans towards Northern Africa, Yemen. One person, I think his name was Baba Budan, he went to Africa during his Makkah trip, Hajj trip. He went to Yemen and brought 7 coffee seeds into India and planted in South India, Karnataka. From there, coffee plantation started in India. So that means coffee was not originally from India. It was brought from outside. Same thing for guava. Guava is actually from tropical America, Mexico, Peru, from that region. 17th century, guava came to India. So any species that come from a different place, we call them this by these 4 names: alien, or non-native, or exotic, or non-indigenous. For example, cheetah. Recently, this particular species was introduced in Madhya Pradesh, Kuno National Park from Africa. So that is also an alien species. It is also called a non-native species or exotic species or non-indigenous species. So anything that come from a different place. So for example, I am in Bhopal. I come from Calcutta. So I am an alien to Bhopal, or I am a non-native species in Bhopal. So we can call them by these 4 different names. Now, how this species came? The most important thing is us, we as humans. So as we started the Homo sapiens, we are Homo sapiens. So as we started moving out of Africa, then came to Asia, from Asia to Europe, we bring plants and animals with us. So it has been found that we have introduced so far 37,000 alien species outside their original place. So it can be anything, any species, any plant or any animal. So we humans have recorded around 37,000 alien species outside their native range. And this thing expanded when the Europeans started exploring. For example, when the British came to India and in the other places, they established botanical gardens. Tea was introduced like that from China. So they brought tea, planted in the botanical garden. So like that, many species move from here to there to here, so different places. So humans are the sole responsible animal that introduced many species around the world. Now, when they introduce some species escape human control. So usually when we bring certain plants or animals, if we bring plants, we put them in botanical gardens. When we bring animals, we put them in zoos. But some species, they eventually escape our control. We call them introduced species. So the first we call them alien species. When they escape our control, we call them introduced species. Now, after escaping, they go to the wild, where they survive, where they reproduce on their own without our care. They can survive, they can reproduce on their own. We call them naturalized species. So that is the second thing. So first, alien, something came to our locality. We took them in our control. They escape. We call them introduced. Then they establish themselves in the wild. We call them naturalized. Finally, they start to spread to new areas, different areas, and dominate others. We call them invasive species. So no species can be invasive at first. So he or she has to go, or it has to go through different stages to become invasive. So humans are not only responsible for introducing these plants. So the first thing, that is escape, that I already mentioned. We bring certain plants or animals, put them under our care, and they escape. So that is the first point. Sometimes we release them intentionally. For example, Indian myna. It was introduced from India to the outside world, especially in Mauritius. So we released that particular species in that location. So that is another way of introducing a species from its native range. The third is contaminant. For example, Parthenium. You must have heard about Parthenium. It came to India through wheat from USA, but as a contaminant. That was unintentional. Humans, we as humans, did not intentionally do that. Parthenium came unintentionally. That is contaminant. And the last one is stowaway, like hitchhiking. We know all about hitchhiking. We took rides from unknown passengers. Same way, plants or animals, especially plants, they have certain organs, certain features that can help them to attach to our body, to our clothes, to our luggages, and then move from one place to another. So these are the four major steps through which one particular species can be introduced from one place to another. So as I mentioned, there are four different things. First, one species need to come from its native place to a new place. So the first barrier is geographic barrier. Say, for example, we are taking a species from America to India. So the first barrier is the geographic barrier. It needs to cross certain borders, certain geographic places, and then it comes to India. We keep it in under care, for example, in zoo or in botanical garden. And some of them escape the human control. So that is the second barrier. And then we call them introduced. When it escapes human control, we call them introduced. Then it needs to survive and reproduce on its own in the wild. We call them naturalized. And some of these naturalized species eventually cause the dispersal barrier. That means it spreads to new areas. Then we call them the invasive. So say, for example, 1,000 species crosses the geographic barrier, came to India. But out of this 1,000, only 100 may become introduced. That means they escape human control.
കുഴപ്പമില്ല. എൻ്റെ കയ്യിൽ ഞാൻ കുളിച്ചിട്ട് വരാം.
Okay. And out of this 100 species, again, 10%, they just survive and reproduce in the wild. 10 species. So we call them naturalized. Again, 10%, they become dispersed to new localities. We call them invasive. Usually it's called 10's rule, because at each step, only 10% can cross these particular barriers. So this is called 10's rule. So that now the question becomes, so when we talk about just one species here, out of these 1,000 that enter to any place, say for example, India, only one become invasive. So why should we care? One is just a number. So why should we care about them? So the next question that comes, that why we should care about this particular species. So this is the first person who talked about this threat. His name was Charles Elton. He was an animal ecologist. And in 1958, he wrote a book called The Ecology of Invasion by Animals and Plants. So all these terms like invasion, moving from one place to another, this was neither new nor something interesting at that time, because people already knew about these things. But he was the first person who conceptualized this whole thing and identified that we as humans are responsible, are the most responsible organism on this planet that are moving this species from one location to another. So that's why he's not a founder, not a prophet, but actually he is, maybe he can be called as a siren, the whistleblower. So he first pointed out that we should be concerned about this species. Why we should be concerned? So we will talk about three things. Now let's look at this particular animal. Our house cat is very cute, very beautiful. So house cat actually is not from India. So we all know this species. We see these species all around us, but actually house cat is again from Africa. Some 9,000 years ago, scientists have discovered a mummy of 9,000 years ago of a man in Cyprus. In Cyprus, alongside the man, there was another mummy of a cat, a grave of a cat. Same direction as the man was lying, the westward direction. So from that evidence, scientists have concluded that humans have domesticated cat around 9,000 years ago, around approximately 9,000 years ago. And from them, people have introduced cats throughout the world. So now cats are present in every places, in every continent on the earth except Antarctica. But cats are present everywhere. They are adorable, they are cute, we keep them as pets, but they cause huge ecological damage. Actually, cats are one of the most problematic species across the globe. One study was done where it has been found that cats can have more than 2,000 species. Cats can eat more than 2,000 species. Out of those 2,000 species, around 350 are basically extinct. So because of cats, more than 300 species have gone extinct. So especially, and this is especially true for the house cats. So although they seem very cute, very popular, very adorable as a pet, but they as an invasive species cause huge ecological damage. And I am leaving about the diseases that they spread, about the nuisance that they spread. I am not anti-catting, but cats are one of the most problematic invasive species that the world knows so far. This is dodo. We are also sometimes are invasive species. This is dodo. Dodo was a particular land animal that was found in Mauritius. 1507, Portuguese sailors went to Mauritius. They found this particular plant. They cannot fly higher. Yeah. They cannot fly much higher. They are ground-bearing plant. They can have just one egg. So the Portuguese sailor find that a very good thing for their meat. So they started killing. Along with the Portuguese sailors came their own animals. For example, dogs, pigs, donkeys, horses. They started competing with the dodo for their habitat. So the habitat pressure was there, overexploitation, killing, everything was there. So that was too much for the dodo species. So in 1507, when the Portuguese sailor came, and within 105 years, around 1600 or something, the last dodo was killed and the species gone extinct. So actually the Portuguese sailor was not native in that particular area, the Mauritius. We as humans go there, started killing this particular bird and make them extinct. Actually, that's why after humans, the invasive species are the second biggest driver of species extinction. In one study, scientists have found that out of 170 extinct species that we know, for those 91 species, invasive species directly contributed. And for 34 species, they were the sole purpose or sole cause for their extinction. So you can understand how much they can cause harm to the environment, to our ecology, to the species that is around us. So that is just one example. There are many examples that shows that invasive species or some alien invasive species cause species extinction. What is the situation in India? Most of you, I hope you know what this particular plant is. We call it water hyacinth. Basically, the invasive plant species, India's natural area, 66% of India's natural areas is threatened by this invasive plant species. So that is in case of India. Take this one. We see this particular bird all around us. So it's not like that all alien species came to India. We, Indians, have also some contribution to the world. For example, this particular species. This is called Indian myna, basically native of Maharashtra. And from Maharashtra, it spread to the world and has been considered as world's 100 worst invasive species. It predates on other birds. It predates on other birds' nest, their eggs, spread disease, everything. So from Maharashtra, it was first introduced to New Zealand, from New Zealand to Australia. Right now, they are spread Europe, North America, Africa, Australia, any continent you can think of, except South America. So they are spread everywhere. And they are considered among the world's 100 worst invasives. Only three bird invasive species are there, and Indian myna is one of them. So you can think how this species can be problematic for our environment. So that is only for the ecological part. Coming to the economic part. Ecology is fine. So we as humans do not understand the problem until we talk about money. So invasive species can also cause huge economic loss. Black rat, again, Indian origin, but spread throughout the world. So that is also India's contribution to the world. And it caused huge economic loss. It destroys stored food grain, it destroys human infrastructure, it spread disease. So everything that you can think of that can be associated with black rats. So that is a direct economic loss. Comes to the management cost. So for example, take this particular water body. It's entirely covered with water hyacinth. Now imagine these people are engaged to clear this water hyacinth patch. How much money? This is just a snapshot. Now, just imagine how much money it can cost when you want to clear a large water body full of water hyacinth. You may have seen certain water bodies around your home, outside your college, outside your workplace. So that particular plant, water hyacinth. So this is just an example. I'm giving you some examples. So management is also involved. Invasive species do not directly impact the cost like rats, all invasive species, but some invasive species are so costly to manage that the management cost is too high. So what is the estimate? Recent estimates globally, $423 billion every year is being spent to manage the invasive species. So this is the latest report that shows that invasive species are costing the global economy billions. To be precise, $423 billion per year. What about India? It's not much lower, 27.3 billion in the last 60 years. India has spent to manage the invasive alien species. Actually, India is the second most invasion cost bearing country after the United States of America. So that is the economic component. If we talk about economic component, that much invasive species can cost us. Last component, human health. So invasive species not only destroys ecology, doesn't have a devastating impact on economy, but it can also cause serious problem in human health. We all know about mosquito. Again, American origin, or this particular one, Asian tiger mosquito, is of Asian origin actually, and it has spread to every continent of the world, including Antarctica, and it has been linked to more than 20 diseases. For example, yellow fever, chikungunya, dengue, all these things. So that is also an alien and invasive species. Parthenium. So when I come to my university here, the roadsides are completely full of this particular plant. This is from South America, Parthenium. And it has been introduced to India with wheat as a contaminant from USA. Now the Parthenium is a cause of allergic problems, contact dermatitis, even can cause mutagenesis in humans and livestock like cows, buffaloes, etc., goats. So that can cause mutagenesis in humans and livestock. So that is directly related to human health problems. So basically there are triple burdens that I have talked about. So first is the extinction or the ecological damage. So for example, you can see 218 alien species caused 1,215 local extinction of native species. Economically, $423 billion they cost. And quality of life, human life, especially human life, negative impact of good quality of life in 85% cases. So scientists reviewed some people, a large number of people actually, and 85% people they say responded that yes, due to certain presence of certain invasive alien species, they have a negative impact of good quality of life. Say for example, you woke up in the morning, you open your window, there is a beautiful wetland outside your window and you found it fully covered with Eichhornia or water hyacinth. So how does it feel? If you like greenery, then it may good to you. But if you don't, so the entire water body is covered with, so there is no other animals, no other plants, only water hyacinth, water hyacinth, or water hyacinth. So that is kind of good quality of life, impact on good quality of life. So there are triple burdens. These are called triple burdens: ecological, economic, and quality or human health. So these are the three burdens of invasive alien species. Now we talk about invasive species, alien species, everything, but when we should act? So usually sooner the better, because as you can see, this is the time. So as the time progresses, this is the area that the invasive species can occupy. So as you can see, as the time progresses, this one is the area is becoming larger and larger, and this side is the cost. The cost is also increasing. So that means we should do these three things first. First, we need to prevent, so that no species can be introduced outside their native place. So that is prevent. Even if it is introduced for commercial purposes or something, we should take their care. That means we should keep them under our control. So that is the first step, prevention. The second step, eradicate. Somehow they escape. Eradicate them immediately. If they found problematic in any place, eradicate them. If we cannot eradicate, the third step is containment. So there is the certain species are present in certain localities. We should contain them there so that they not spread to anywhere else. So these are the three steps: prevention, eradication, and containment. Because if these three stages passes and the invasive species start spreading, then the cost becomes too high to manage the invasive species. So the motto is sooner the better: early detection and rapid control, but rapid response. That should be our motto. Now, how we do that? Then last question comes, that how we do that. So there are certain methods. We can do them mechanically. For example, removing this water hyacinth from the water body. That is one way. The second thing, chemical. We can apply herbicides, pesticides, anything on them. That is chemical. Biological means we can introduce other species from outside and they can control the invasive plant species. I give you the example of Indian myna. Indian myna actually was introduced by the French from India, from Maharashtra to Mauritius to control certain pest. But eventually the myna itself escaped and became invasive. So that is the drawback of biological control. It needs to be very, very precise. Chemical control, we spray certain herbicide, we spray certain pesticide to manage one invasive plant species or invasive species. It may happen that this pesticide may be detrimental for a native species. So the native species gets affected, another species gets affected, and mechanical, it is too costly. For example, you can see if you take this particular water body, it is fully covered with water hyacinth. Mechanical is not worthy, cost worthy for this particular management option. So these are all large scale management options. We as an individual, how we can contribute to this problem. First thing, we should know about this species. So for the left one is the Parthenium. We all know about Parthenium. So that is came from US. Now 35 million hectare land has been estimated to be infested with Parthenium currently. What about the second plant? It's very beautiful. And when I was in college, I thought about when I will grow up, I will use this plant in my marriage or something in some special occasion, because this plant was so beautiful. Later, I came to know that this particular plant called lentil, it's arrived in India as a shrub in the 1880s from South America. Right now, it has invaded more than 40% of India's tiger reserve and most Indian pasture lands besides forest. So this is actually, most of the Indian states are actually infested by this particular plant. So we should know about all these species. So the first step should be gain knowledge. The second step should be inform others. The third step, be vigilant. We should have an open eye. And the fourth step should be, we should take actions, whatever we can do. For example, if I see a Parthenium, one particular Parthenium plant inside our campus, I should take it, remove it. So that kind of a small level action, but I could take certain kind of actions. Last example, this one. We know all about pigeons, right? but very few of us know that it is actually from Europe, North America, and from there it spread all over the world. And especially, this is a report from the Times of India, New Delhi. So the pigeons turn messengers of diseases and destruction. So they actually called rock dove. Why they called rock dove? Because they usually love to nest in rocks and hills and all these things. And the urban infrastructure, the large buildings, they resemble or they imitate as rocks to this particular bird species. So they come in flocks there. So pigeons can also be considered as an invasive alien species. They are actually predators on other birds, their foods, their habitats, and they are also associated with human nuisance. So that's why this is just a report from Delhi, but the same situation is from Hyderabad, same for Kolkata, same from Bhopal. So the pigeons are also an invasive, can be considered as an invasive species. So as I said, there should be 4 steps. First, you should gain the knowledge. You should inform others. You should be vigilant whenever you find anything that you gain knowledge, and then you can take certain actions. So now it's time to wrap up. The first thing, we know what we have discussed, that some alien species can become a costly affair. The second thing, that biological invasion is a process. So no species, say for example, the low man can be a thief from his birth. Same thing can be called from a species. No species can be invasive in just one day or one step. It's basically a process. When it's first introduced, we call it introduced, then it became naturalized, then it became invasive. So it's a process. And we should be vigilant and take early actions as early as possible at every step of this process. So there are certain questions that I think you have in mind, that are all aliens bad? Of course not. But given time, some aliens can be invasive. So we should be aware of them. What are the known invasives? What can be the invasive species in near future or in future? What can I do to prevent alien invasion? We should start small. We should keep an open eye, and we should spread the word. That means we should create awareness, both within ourselves and among others. What about the invasive aliens we adore or use? For example, cat, we all adore them. But remember that your likings can be harmful for others. So you should behave responsibly, or we all should behave responsibly. We all, maybe I like lantana. I bring it here, plant it here, but then again, it can be a problem for other species. So we should be responsible for others also. Then the last one, for example, this is true for me. I want to know more. Where can I get information? So there are many sources. Let's start with Google. It has everything, right? So we can start with Google. Thank you. So now you have any questions, I am open for the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Achyut. I think a lot of discussion already started. I think you kind of, there were some thought-provoking statements that you made. So
Yeah.
peer-to-peer interaction had already started. Let me just help them, allow participants to unmute themselves. Yeah, so if you have a question, I think ask now, but one at a time. If you can raise your hand, then I'll know who should be asking. I'll go in the order of you raising hands. So Rishan, Inatuti, and Akshay in that order. We won't, I mean, stop sharing if you would like, but I think the PPT Achyut was fantastic. We want to go to the slides again if there are questions, but you can stop sharing and then, yeah. So you can come on audio and then ask the question. Oh, there's a long list. I think we have to wrap it up by 10:55. But others who are not speaking can stay on mute, please. Yes, Rishan Gupta, what's your question?
Told that some species are they dominate over other species in when they're introduced in a new environment. And I was reading somewhere the introduction of an exotic species or invasive species is like necessary. Like, could you tell me an example of that?
The necessary introduction.
Yes, sir.
Oh, so for example, the tea. tea was a necessary introduction. Actually, no introduction was necessary. So, for example, tea. So the British liked tea, so they introduced tea from China. Same thing goes for coffee. So these were all the introductions that seemed necessary at that time. So the people introduced them. Now, some of these species, say for example, I give you an example of Indian myna. So it was introduced outside India from Maharashtra to Mauritius to control certain pest. Then eventually it became escaped from human control and become problematic. Starts dominating on other species, became invasive. That's answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Ansika, your question? It'll really help if you could just tell from which part of the country you are, and just for the nice, it's such a. Or is it Akshay who asked the question now? I think suddenly I can see Akshay's hand up.
Good
Akshay,
morning,
yes.
sir. I am Akshay from Bhopal, MP in India.
Mhm.
I had a doubt, sir. You were talking about many species being extinct, but like, what if there are some animals which lived underwater that we think are now extinct, but they just live in the part of the ocean that we still haven't explored yet? So, how can we say that they are extinct?
Yeah, so there are many species. So when we talk about extinct, that means there are certain records of that species being present at certain point of time. So right now we cannot find them. For example, as I gave the example of dodo. So we knew that the species was present at that time. Now there are many unexplored places in the world. So maybe some species are there. So they should not be called extinct. They're hidden from plain eyesight, from our eyesight basically. So when we talk about extinct species, we knew about their existence at certain point of time. Maybe they changed their habitat. We could not find them there at that particular place. That means the species is locally extinct from that place. It may be present in some other parts of the world, maybe under the sea, as you mentioned, or on top of the mountain, that can happen. But at that particular place, at that particular scale, at that particular local, the species is extinct.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Ansika, your question, please.
Yeah, hello sir. Sorry, my phone was hanging. That's why I wasn't able to respond last time. So I don't have a question, but a request to make that I was having some network issues during the meeting, so I was not able to hear properly what was being said, and I had some gaps which needs to be filled. So I'd request that can I have the meeting recording because I just want to take a look to it and understand everything.
We will do that. We will share that. Just send us an email at outreach@apu.edu.in. We will share that across. And I agree with you.
So, sir,
Yeah. I mean, it's quite nice. The PowerPoint presentation and especially the slides that Achyut used kind of augmented well with what he was speaking. I would not have imagined the most peaceful cat to be contributing towards ecological damage. And he brought in for those who joined in late, he also he made a statement: humans being will understand only if we talk money, right? So he brought in that element of economic loss, management loss, of course, health related issues, and then the triple burden that we're facing because of this. Yeah, and of course, I mean, what I liked, Achyut, is you also spoke about the solution, the long-term control that we should do, rather than only talking about the problem, and that's the hope that the next generation. The more I lose hope on adults in the sense of my age, the hope is the next generation that you will be the next, big scientist working on biological invasion and preventing uh, preventing it. Okay, so we'll share the recording. Shaurya and then Inaduti Mitra. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name. Shaurya, what's the question?
Yes, sir. So can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Hello? Yeah. I was just wondering if, in case if we start eradicating alien species and invasive species in our locality as
Mhm.
a mitigation or as a solution,
Mhm.
I doubt there'll be any other species which will grow in the same area very soon. So we'll just end up destroying the current ecology and we won't have any regeneration of any native species until we plant it.
So, do you think will other species grow on the same patch of land after an invasive species has already grown, or it will be necessary to plant a native species and then nurture it until it grows up?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Actually, when we talk about eradication, we should be care actually about the other things that are present in that ecosystem. For example, if we talk about land on that particular species. But along with that, that's why I mentioned that we should be very careful about from the very beginning. So when the species just starts arriving there until an entire ecosystem builds around it. So now when we talk about an entire ecosystem and its impact, so there can be positive impacts and as well as negative impacts. So we should be very careful when judging. Is the positive impact more? And it should be very, very, very scale specific. So at that particular scale, is the species present there? Is it having a positive impact on certain species or negative impact? So whichever way the balance is heavier, we should go with that decision. And planting about native species, yes, restoration is very, very important thing. We call it restoration, ecological restoration. So when we remove something, we should plant something and we should always promote invasive, native species. For example, I can talk about when we remove lantana from one place, we should think of certain suitable native alternative for that particular species. So the humans depending on it, they can get similar benefits, not the same benefits, but they can get similar benefits from it. So that's how the prevention, the eradication, and restoration, these two things should go simultaneously, hand by hand.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, can I ask now?
Yes, please.
Sir, I am Minaduti Mitra from Kolkata. And sir, today the things you told about aliens, it actually blew my mind. I never knew that aliens could be like no, this native species, non-native species. Thank you, sir, for this. So my question is that, sir, is it better to introduce alien species that become neutralized with the natives without harming the biodiversity, or to multiply the native species in their homelands? Which is better according to you?
According to me, we should always go with the native species. Say, for example, you go to a nursery to buy certain flowers for your home garden. So you should always prefer native over the exotic ones. That's my opinion.
Okay, sir.
That was your question, right?
Yes, sir. But sir, different variations are better, no? So isn't it better
I think,
to
yeah.
use?
Good. I mean, I think the country is in safe hands. At least they're asking such questions. I think at what cost could be the question, right? What are we doing this by bringing? Is it good aesthetically only for the eyes? What is it doing to the environment? I think we have to do some kind of a cost evaluation and then take a call whether it's right or
Exactly.
not.
So for example, when lantana was arrived here, so the British also think like this. So we need variations. So let's bring lantana here. Now see what is the cost of lantana introduction. So that's why we should take our choices responsibly and knowingly.
Okay, sir.
I want to give chance for everyone to at least speak. I think I won't be able to take questions after Tanushia. That will be the last one. But we have 5 more. Vrikshak, what's the question? Vrikshak, sorry.
Yeah, sir, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
quite clear.
Yeah, good morning, sir. Thank you for the session. So my doubt is that, like in the beginning, you gave a data that species overexploitation and invasive species, they they contribute 24% and 13% of environmental degradation. So then why do climate scientists focus mainly on the minorities, that is pollution and climate change, like how to eradicate those, instead of eradicating invasive species and species overexploitation?
Okay, so that's a good question. So that the percentage that I showed, so that is from one report. So that is very subjective. So the people working in the climate change thing, so they feel that climate change is the biggest issue. Pollution is the biggest issue. So these all are very subjective. But if we talk about numbers, so that numbers that I showed, basically invasive species, when we talk about environmental health at a large scale, invasive species contributed that particular percentage that I showed. But just remember that all these things are very much interrelated. Like, for example, climate change can influence invasive species or biological invasion. So all these things, say, for example, climate change, one particular species is favored more over others, that can be invasive species. So that's how this whole thing operates. So nothing is inseparable or separable from one another. So everything is connected. So if you feel that you can do climate change studies and contribute to safeguard our environment, that is fine. Someone can think, okay, I will approach this problem through invasive species. So that is another way.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Akhil and then Dipanjan Das. Akhil, what's the question?
So you said you told us how to control plant invasive species like plucking them or maybe But how do we control animal invasive species like pigeons and dogs like that?
Again, the last part.
I think the question is, I think there's some background. I think the question is, how do we, when you are, question is, did you mostly talk about controlling plant invasive species for animal invasion that's happening, especially pigeons? And is there a way to control them? I think that's what you asked.
Yes.
Yeah, so for when we talk about animal invasive species and their control, again, we should be more vigilant. Say, for example, for pigeon control. So for pigeon control, humans have installed so many things. So they have taken certain preventive measures. But again, when it's outside our control, it's outside. I mean, we cannot control them basically. So the cost becomes too high. So that's why I mentioned that when we talk about controlling them, we should start at very beginning. Otherwise, there are three options, the same options for plants: mechanical, chemical, and biological. So the same options go as for the animals also.
But if we control them by eradicating them, there are like suppose there's animal control for dogs. There are many people protesting against it.
Yeah. For example, the cat. So there are basically two groups: the cat lovers and the I don't say them cat haters, but actually they know about what the problems the cats can bring. So there are basically two groups. So these two groups should come at a mutual stage by discussion. That is the only way that I know. So, and again, this is very much context specific. At that particular context, what that particular species, the animal species, are causing. Based on that, we should take any decision, not overall or not any large scale, something like that. It should be very, very context.
Dipanjan, what's the question? And then Anandita Nair. Dipanjan, you there? Dipanjan Das?
Good morning, sir. So I am from Raipur, Chhattisgarh. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead. Raipur, is it? Raipur, Chhattisgarh.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's quite clear.
Yes, sir. Sir, I had a question that introducing species had ever made any problem to us?
Problem two?
We lost you. I think you need to unmute yourself. Introducing species, whether introduce problems. Yeah, I mean, I think the session did cover economic loss, management loss, and health related issues. These are the three broad things that I remember from my notes. Is that the question? Dipanjan, I think we lost you. We'll come back to you again. We can't hear you. Anandita, your question? And then Fatima Mansoor.
Good morning, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Anandita and I'm from Mumbai. Thank you for the session. So my question is, given the example of a domestic cat, any species could potentially pose an unforeseen threat to the environment or to people. So according to you, sir, is this a signal for humanity to limit our experiments and interactions with biodiversity so that these kind of adversities can be avoided?
Like you said, any species can be problematic. So for example, there are many examples of native invasive species. So in today's session, I have just talked about alien invasive species. That means which doesn't belong here basically originally, so which were introduced from outside. But I don't agree that we should limit our experiments or we should limit our curiosity. We should do that, of course, but responsibly. So even if we do it, some certain experiments on certain exotic animals or certain exotic plants, we should, after the experiment is over, we should behave responsibly. For example, when I did my work in my PhD, I did my work on a particular invasive plant. So after each round of experiment, I took utmost care to destroy the plant samples so that it doesn't go out of the lab, go out in the wild and create certain problems. Because once these plants or animals go out of our control, it's very difficult to manage them, especially in the wild. So yes, experiments should be done, but responsibly.
Okay, sir.
Thank
And
you.
also,
Thank
like
you.
as a
Yeah.
follow-up, so we know that GMOs, like genetically modified organisms, are getting a lot of popularity in today's times. But that is also a form of experimentation, and we can never tell whether those kind of species become invasive at a later point. So is that also not an equally important challenge?
Exactly. Yes, I agree with you that the GMOs are also can be a problem, can be a challenge. But yes, certain deductions need to be made, certain experiments need to be done, and only then we can talk about that, yes, this particular GMO can be a problem. So we should be more careful about that. But there are many, many, many plants or animal species that are already known invasive or known problematic species. So I think that at this point of time, India needs to be more aware of this species and starts thinking about them. So compared to other countries, especially the developed countries or the European countries or the North American countries, we have little awareness. So this particular session is just to create that awareness among you, among all of us, so that we can behave more responsibly from next time. That's all.
Okay, thank you so
And
much.
and another, I like that you use the word biodiversity, right?
Yeah.
And that's in fact a minor that we offer at Azim Premji University. It's called biodiversity conservation. That you study biology as a major. I mean, today's session is not designed to tell you about the programs, but you could study biology and biodiversity conservation at Azim Premji University, or for that matter, social science with the biodiversity conservation, right? It's not only about looking at through the lens of science, but if how do you look at as a lens of social sciences? Who is it impacting this most? Right? Some of them are just quote unquote enjoying climate change with air conditioned room, but others
Yeah.
have to sweat it out in the things, right? So thanks for that question. Two more questions. I think we should have next time. We'll plan it for a longer session. I never imagined, Achyut, to be frank, this kind of a response from India. So, but last two questions, and we need to stop. Fatima and Tanusha, we will stop. Ragnia, your question we'll take next when, because Alok has been waiting for the last 15 minutes. Uh, so Fatima and Tanusha's question, and we'll end this segment. Fatima, what's your question?
Good morning, sir. I'm from Bangalore, and
Mhm.
my question is, how will the offspring of invasive species and the native species affect the ecology? Like, will they be invasive or will they behave like native species?
Okay. So the offsprings, when we talk about offsprings, so again, as I said, so they are not invasive from their very birth. So they need certain time. For example, when one particular plant or one particular animal gives birth to a baby, so yeah, they can be problematic. So we need to be very careful from that point of time.
So it's always very uncertain. Yes, sir.
Not uncertain. They will be problematic. Say, for example, one lantana baby plant will be lantana, and again, it will be problematic if we let them grow to their full extent.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Tanusha?
Hello, sir. I'm Tanusha from Tamil Nadu. Sir, you had told that for long-term control we could use containment, but won't it destroy the place in which the species is contained?
Containment is the last step. So the first one is the prevention, the second one is the eradication, and the last step is the containment. Containment means we do not want the species to go out from that particular place. Say, for example, I see Parthenium in Bhopal, one particular location. I contained it because it's not feasible to manage them. Economically, maybe it's not feasible. So we take certain cares or we take certain measures so that the species cannot escape from that particular area. Say, for example, when the COVID happened, so there were certain containment zones. And within that containment zones, the treatment things occur. So COVID is also kind of alien species. Although the viral disease are not treated as biological invasion, but they have every characters of biological invasions. So when COVID happened, government set up certain containment zones. The same theory or the same concept applies here too. So contain the zones, treat the plants or animals within that zone, then release that.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. I think on that note, we should move to the next one. But interestingly, actually, there was a question somebody asked. I think I'll quickly answer that. I don't know whether you started in the session by saying that you are alien to Bhopal. And the question that somebody's asking, you are a human and are humans, so how can you be an alien species, right? But let me tell a quick, not a quick joke. If you go to the United States and if you are not a, and it's from a taxpayer perspective, you are called a non-resident alien. in the IRS, what's called the Internal Revenue Service website, if you're not a US citizen, you are identified as a resident alien or a NRI, non-resident alien. On that note, I think we should end this and move to the next one. There are a lot of comments there, Achyut, you could read on the chat. I'm sure you do not get a time now. We could just go through.
Yeah.
And I'm now inviting my colleague Alok Bang to talk about a fascinating story of interspecies hybrid. Just if you can come on camera, and then I'm going to add you onto this. And you should be able to share your screen as well. So finish the first session. We are getting into the next one. Both, how are they related? Are they related or not related? Yes. Are they related, not related? You will figure it out. But then over to you, Alok.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Clear.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. No. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one second. Hi everyone. So my name is Alok Bang. I'm an ecologist by profession. You must have heard about ecology, biodiversity, conservation issues in the previous talk, and I do some of it myself. I did my PhD from Bangalore. I did my PhD from IISc Bangalore. I've worked in India and outside for quite a few years now. Most of my work during PhD has been on evolution and on insects, but since then I've been working on biodiversity conservation. Like Achyut, I worked quite for a long time on invasive species, but also kind of more broadly on issues related to global change biology. Talking about today's topic, which is on interspecies hybrids, right? Before getting to the biology of the topic, let's quickly see how interspecies hybrids are reflected in our mythology or folklore. We have the figure of Narasimha, who was neither a human nor an animal in Indian mythology. He was half human.
You can go to the next slide. I think it's still on the first slide, Alok.
Slideshow.
Go to slideshow.
It is on slideshow here. One second. Is it visible now?
But it's still in PPT mode. I mean, it's not in full screen mode.
Yeah. So Rajgopal, when I do on the full mode, it's probably not visible at your end.
Yeah. What you do is you stop sharing, and when you share it again, share the full screen mode. Don't share the PPT.
Okay.
So
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
That's a bug in Zoom actually.
Okay. One second. Rajgopal, how do I? So you're saying that I should make it on the presentation mode, but
And
then
then
after
share it.
that, it won't
Share
allow me
screen.
to.
You have to go. You have to do an Alt Tab and go to the Zoom thing.
Okay, got it.
Alt Tab, go to the Zoom thing, and then share screen, and then ping it.
Share screen. Okay, now numbers.
Yeah, I think that's the slideshow thing. That you can click that. That should work. No?
It's not working.
You can continue like this. That's fine. I think you can just move on this page down. You can do that. Should be fine. You can just click close the animation panel.
Okay.
But the only thing, the animation will not work.
Yeah. So basically, we have creatures like the characters like Narasimha in Indian mythology, who was neither a human nor an animal, which means that it was a hybrid between human and lion. We have centaurs. You must have heard about centaurs in Harry Potter, but also it is a mythological creature in Greek mythology, which is half human and half horse. You have this character called Anubis, which has human body and dog or jackal head, and this is reflected in Egyptian mythology. So our mythology and folklore is replete with characters that are interspecies hybrids. But it is not just in folklore or mythology. We see them also in visual arts, right? So, for example, Leonardo da Vinci has drawn extensively about human-animal hybrids, basically on human. Okay. Okay. So, in visual art, you see similar sort of hybrids between humans and animals. Leonardo da Vinci has drawn extensively these kinds of hybrids where he drew animal faces on animal kind of features on human faces. Now, you also see interspecies hybrids in some kind of modern surrealist painters like Salvador Dali, who drew tiger-human hybrids. You see them reflected in literature. So there's this book in the last century, around 1900, the book called The Island of Dr. Moreau, H.G. Wells, and basically talks about some sort of experiments going on a remote island where some sort of a hybridization between humans and animals is occurring. And this is being carried over by some kind of a mad scientist. Right? A movie was made in 1970s, quite a well-known movie and a very fascinating movie. Another book wherein you see genetically engineered human beings is a very famous book by Aldous Huxley called Brave New World. So you see in mythology, in popular culture, in literature, in arts, coming to more modern times, quite a few of you might have seen the movie Fantastic Beasts. Many fascinating hybrids are there. All of them imaginary, but they kind of give you a window to human beings, human society's fascination about hybrids. You have characters from series like X-Men. You have characters from series like Star Trek and Star Wars, where different species individuals can interbreed and create offsprings, right? So interspecies couples are quite common in series like Star Trek and Star Wars. And this kind of commonality of interspecies hybrids in our history, in our culture, and in our present times gives rise to quite a few very interesting kinds of questions, right? Clearly, we are excited by interspecies hybrids. We are fascinated. Quite often, we are afraid. They might be shown as a figure of anxiety, fear, a figure of that kind of create havoc. Quite often, we also look at them like superheroes. They have superhuman strengths or some sort of an ability. Clearly, as human species, we are excited by interspecies hybrids. So the first question that arises is why? Why are we so excited? The other thing is, why do so many different cultures, why have they come up independently with symbols or tales in literature, folklore, and other cultural sources around interspecies hybrids? So you can understand some sort of, one-off incident of these figures. But why do different continents, different countries, these figures reflecting in different languages, arising independently? Why should that happen? And then the question arises, is the phenomenon of hybrids real and evidence-based, or is it completely fictitious and imaginary? And if it is real, then as people who are interested in biology or as practicing biologists, what does the science say about it? Now, there have been a lot of people who have been working on this aspect in biology, especially in the last 100 years or so. And the logic, but also their work suggests that it is quite likely that cultural symbolism has arisen from our observations of hybrids in our surroundings, which means that hybrids were already there, they were always there, even before human beings came along. And as human beings started observing the nature and the environment around us, we started seeing some patterns, some commonalities, and some differences between individuals. And that is how, when we started categorizing animals or plants into different species, we started realizing that quite often there are some individuals who do not fit any category. So, for example, they can be lions, they can be tigers, but quite often there are some individuals which do not fit the category of either a lion or a tiger because they have combinatorial characters, they have combinations of characters, right? And these kinds of observations of human beings and their observations of nature around them probably led to the reflection of interspecies hybrids also in our culture. It is quite often that we have some sort of a plant blindness. We are fascinated by animals. We are fascinated quite recently by microorganisms due to the recent COVID pandemic that happened. But we in general have some sort of a blindness around plants and different kinds of exciting things that plants have to offer to us. Based on today's topic on interspecies hybrids, quite often we see hybridization in plants. If we talk about a very commonly consumed family of plants in our daily lives, the citrus family, we see that citrus family has a lot of non-hybrid members, but the most commonly consumed members are not the ones that are non-hybrid species, which means species such as the lemons or the lime that we consume, or for example, some of you might have eaten grapefruits. These are not non-hybrid species. These are species that have arisen out of hybridization between naturally occurring species. These quite often have occurred naturally, but quite often they have happened because of human intervention. Humans have crossed plants with each other, and they have come up with newer and newer varieties of consumable plants. Quite often, you also see very fascinating examples of hybrids in the animal world. So, for example, there are mules, which are a hybrid between a jack and a mare, that is a male donkey and a female horse. You have something called keep or shoat, which is a hybrid between a goat and a sheep. You have an animal called zorse. Obviously, you can make out it's a hybrid between zebra and horse. You have something called coy wolf, which is a hybrid variety between coyote and wolf. You have something funnily called wolfin, which is a hybrid between whale and dolphin, specific types of whales, killer whales and bottlenose dolphins. You have something called growlers or grizzly bears, and they are a hybrid species, hybrids between grizzly bears and polar bears. And then maybe the most commonly, most popularly known hybrid species, known as ligers and tigons. Don't mistake them with the recently released film, horrible film. But liger, which is a hybrid between male lion and a female tiger, and a tigon, which is a hybrid between male tiger and a female lion. Right. So animals provide a lot of fascinating, beautiful, sometimes quite bizarre examples of hybridization, interspecies hybrids. If we go and delve into cat family further, there are remarkable examples of hybridization in the cat family. And these are not hybrids that necessarily occur with human interventions in the zoos. Quite often, they occur naturally. So, non-hybrid or naturally occurring species in the cat family would be, say, lions, tigers, leopards, jaguars, pumas, so on and so forth. But you have very, sometimes very bizarre, very weirdly looking, but sometimes quite beautiful looking hybrids such as ligers, tigons, something called leopjack, which is a hybrid between leopard and jaguar, something called pompard, which is puma and leopard hybrid, something called tiger, which is tiger and leopard hybrid, and something called lepon, which is a leopard and lion hybrid. And all this together gives rise to the diversity of species and animals around us. Now, in this context, in the context of whatever I spoke so far, it is important to know how does biology define species. And the way, very simply put, the way biology defines species is that individuals should be able to interbreed, and they should be able to give rise to offsprings that themselves can that themselves can reproduce. So, for example, when we talk about mules, which is a hybrid between donkey and horse, although donkeys and horses have interbred, the mules themselves are not fertile; they are sterile, which means mule is not a different species but is an interspecies hybrid. Right? So the biology, the way it defines species, is that different populations or different individuals should be able to reproduce and should be able to give rise to fertile offsprings. Why is the first point interbreeding? Why should that be a precondition to define a species? Right? Quite often, evolution creates some sort of a hurdle between very different looking, very differently behaving individuals. Right? So, for example, there are behavioral differences. For example, mating rituals, mating related behaviors, mating related songs, mating related features, they're very, very different between different species. And so, if there are differences between different individuals, they might not be able to recognize and they might not be able to get attracted to another individual of their own species. So there are very different behaviors within a species, between species. Then there are genetic and reproductive incompatibilities, right? So, for example, reproductive organs might be very different between males and females of the same species. Sometimes the model it is called a lock and key model, right? So, for example, if reproductive organs between males and females don't match, there is some sort of a reproductive incompatibility. In some cases, although there is reproductive compatibility, at the genetic or the chromosomal level, there is incompatibilities. So, for example, males and females of human beings have 23 sets of chromosomes, right? But imagine a species, another species, which has a different set of chromosomes. You have one parent who has one number of chromosomes. You have another parent with a different number of chromosomes, and that gives rise to some sort of, in many of you might be aware, in the process of meiosis, when haploid kind of gametes are created, and when they fuse together again, there's at that level there's some sort of a genetic or chromosomal incompatibility between different species. So that gives rise to some sort of a hurdle for interbreeding. And finally, there is some sort of a geographic isolation. So species that do not occur in the same area naturally cannot reproduce with each other. In this slide, there is a map of lion and tiger and how they're distributed within India. So the part in orange is the tiger distribution, and part in yellow, which is the state of Gujarat, has the distribution of lions. Very naturally, these two species do not occur in the same ecological area, in the same ecosystem. Quite often they're distant from each other, and that is because they have very specialized niche in the ecosystem. Right? Tigers basically they are a species of forest ecosystems. Lions are a species that occupy grassland ecosystems, and hence these two species are geographically isolated from each other. So interbreeding, the first precondition for species concept, there could be behavioral differences, there could be genetic or reproductive incompatibilities, or there could be geographic isolation between different populations. The second aspect on which species concept is based on fertility and mortality, right? So the offsprings of an interspecies hybrid, the offspring has to be fertile, right? Quite often these offsprings are not fertile. They cannot reproduce further, which means that their existence stops at their level. They cannot give rise to next generations. This happens for a variety of reasons. The incompatibility at the genetic and chromosomal level gives rise to sterility. But quite often, even if they are fertile, they kind of get affected by a lot of diseases and disorders at the genetic, chromosomal, physiological level. For example, in the cat hybrids that we just talked, Ligers and Tigons, there are quite often genetic as well as neurological disorders, because of which the lifespan of individuals is drastically reduced. Also, you must realize that species have evolved in response to their environment. And this evolution has occurred quite often over hundreds of thousands of years, quite often over millennia, right? So some sort of synchronization has happened between the species and its environment. And it is said that the species that exists and reproduces and survives is basically it has achieved some sort of a evolutionary fitness. It is in some sort of evolutionary synchrony with its environment. When some sort of new hybrid comes, a new variety comes, it might not be very well adapted to its environment. So that might lead to its evolutionary fitness going down. But despite having said all of this, there are quite a lot of viable hybrids, fertile hybrids, reproductively and physiologically healthy hybrids who have quite long lifespan. And all this provides an exception to our concept of species, our understanding of how we define species. Quite often species overlap in their distributions. Quite often this leads to natural interbreeding between species, which means that there's less role of genetic and chromosomal incompatibilities. The interspecies hybrids are healthy and viable, which means their immunity and physiology is quite good. Quite often they survive longer than even their parents. So, for example, ligers, the hybrid between lions and tigers, they live longer even than their parents, which means that they are ecologically stable and also they're fertile themselves. So, for example, ligers can reproduce with lions or tigers and give rise to something known as liligers, which are again an interspecies hybrid, which means that they're not sterile, but they're fertile themselves, which means that they're evolutionarily also successful. Interspecies hybrids and their importance in the ecology and the evolutionary studies is quite high. We're just getting to know them, we're just understanding them, and the research on this topic has started just in the last 100 years. Now, why is all of this important in the context of the biodiversity extinction crisis? I'm sure the previous speaker has spoken about it, but very briefly, we are right now in the middle of a mass extinction crisis. There are quite a few human-generated processes that are giving rise to the biodiversity loss. We have an infinitely or kind of indeterminately growing population. We have increasing consumption, overexploitation of resources, and there's reduced resource efficiency, right? And all this put together gives rise to phenomena or drivers such as habitat loss, invasive species about which the previous speaker spoke, overexploitation of resources, pollution, climate change, and all this put together gives rise to loss of biodiversity. By some estimates, the background loss of species, this is the 6th mass extinction. So this is not the first time it is happening in the planet's history. It has happened before, but the rate is very, very speedy. The rate is 100 to 1,000 times more than what was happening before in the planet's past. And all this is basically anthropogenic, which means that it is human driven. This does not just affect the biodiversity or non-human species, but it affects humans also. We are dependent for a lot of things on the biodiversity around us. For example, by some estimates, if the pollinators of this world vanish, disappear, we would not be able to eat 70 to 80% of our current grains and crops or vegetables. And this kinds of effects on biodiversity around us impacts us also. And hence, in the future, we need conservation practitioners. This could be done by biologists, but as this is an incumbent danger on the humanity, all of us should be aware about it. Now, how does the process of interspecies hybrids or the topic of interspecies hybrid fit in all of this? Interspecies hybrids quite often, as we saw, are a result of a natural process. It is not just an artificial process. They quite often are found naturally. They definitely increase the biodiversity of a region. Quite often, it is the beginning of the evolution of a new species or the starting of a new species. They also conserve the genetic diversity, which is very essential to conserve biodiversity of a region, right? And if they're important, what can be done to save them? We should create habitats that are specific to interspecies hybrids. We probably should, with of course some kind of conditions in place, we should have successful captive breeding programs. Right now, there is no legislative protection for interspecies hybrids under, for example, India's Wildlife Protection Act. So we should have some sort of policy making and implementation around it. And of course, more research needs to be done by biologists and future conservationists on this issue. Before ending, I would quickly like to go through a recently devised biodiversity conservation occupational track that is going to happen in APU in both campuses, in Bangalore as well as Bhopal. The idea of an occupational track minor is that it is an interdisciplinary program, which means that this program is not specific to biologists. Anyone can take this program, whoever is interested in nature conservation. The program will not be just be biology heavy. There would be ways and strategies in which this would be made accessible to non-biology students as well. It is a series of 5 courses spread over 3 years, and students go from simple courses to more complex courses around biodiversity and nature conservation. Quite often, we see that biodiversity and conservation pedagogy or education is rooted in the Western biodiversity concepts, Western biodiversity examples. But at APU, at Azim Premji University, we want this program to be rooted in the Indian biodiversity. So quite often the examples of species, examples of movements, examples of successful rewilding and restoration, they come from the Indian context. Very quickly, it would be Introduction to Biodiversity as a first foundation course. We would then go to conservation movements in India. We would have a field course on methods for biodiversity and conservation, restoration and rewilding as a solution as a 4th course, and political ecology and human environmental relations as a 5th course. What does a conservation biologist do? They ask questions, right? They ask questions about where are the species located, where are they distributed, how are the spatial and temporal changes in their populations, what are the factors that are affecting their population, who are the various stakeholders, right? Not just people, not just scientists, not just people in NGOs, not just policymakers, but quite often people who are living in the forest or in that closer to that ecosystem are also the stakeholders. What should be the conservation interventions? What would be some of the innovative solutions that we should come up with? And what are the policies, right? So ecology is not just a biological science, but it's a science that is located at the crossroads of science, society, and policy. So what are the policies that can be used or that can be implemented or that can be newly devised to protect a species? So these are a few of the questions that we would be asking within this course. Thank you. We come to the end of this topic. If you have any questions, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Alok. I was in fact going to ask you, whatever you spoke, where is it covered in the curriculum? But you answered that it's also covered partly in the occupational track that we offer.
Yeah.
We now enable at kind of not let them. Yeah, now you should be able to unmute yourself and ask questions. And there's a lot of chats going on. I had to disable the chat, which I will enable. If you need to chat with each other, you could do that. Okay, first question from Talia Lorecho. And then Aditi. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry if I'm
Yes,
not pronounced your name correctly. Go ahead.
You're not the first person to butcher my name, sir.
I'm so sorry, Kiran.
It's fine, sir. Good morning, sir. I'm Thalia from Mysore.
Hi, Thalia.
So I had a question, sir. Like, as you said, hybrids. Humans have been making hybrids to get desirable characteristics from both parents. Since is having hybrids possible in nature also, like, what are the conditions, like reasons that a parent from an opposite species mates with another species to get an hybrid?
There are a variety of reasons. The first would be to answer your first question. Yes, natural occurrences of hybrids are there. What facilitates that? Sometimes mate availability. So if you do not have mate of your own species, you might find someone who belongs to the other species. And since reproduction is some sort of, it is your evolutionary success depends a lot on how many progenies or offsprings you leave behind, right? So every individual would want to reproduce as much as possible. And hence, if your own species mate is not there, you would probably find another mate. And that could be one of the reasons. As you said, why? Sorry, go on.
Sir, but won't that be like a clash between them? Like, for example, we have liger, which is like lions and tigers.
Sure.
And as we see in the wild, they're like enemies. They often clash with each other. But won't that become a problem for mating?
So Talia, if it's a problem, that lineage would anyway be stopped from going ahead because it would be either sterile or there would be some sort of disorder, etc., etc. But to your question, why is it allowed? Think about it evolutionarily speaking. As you might have learned in your biology class, all species came from the same ancestor, right? So the genetic distance between different species would actually determine whether they could reproduce with each other or not. So for example, a cat family species and a dog family species can definitely not interbreed because the evolutionary distance between them or genetic distance between them is too much. But a cat family, different species of the cat family, looks like the evolutionary distance between them is not too much, which means the time when lions and tigers, for example, diverged from each other is not too long ago in evolutionary time, which gives them some sort of a flexibility in reproducing with each other. Taking from the previous speaker's presentation, someone had asked, I think someone called Fatima, as what will happen when native and non-native species start reproducing, right? And yes, they do reproduce quite often, especially if they are related closely to each other. And that gives rise also to interspecies hybrids.
Oh, thank
I
you,
hope
sir.
I could answer your question. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Next is Inadati.
Yes, sir. Sir, I have recently read that male tigers and ligers are infertile, but females, tigers and ligers are fertile. How is it, sir?
No, that's inaccurate. That's not true.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. They can be rare, but they are not infertile.
Okay, sir.
Dipanjan, do you want to ask a question now? Next, Rishabh.
Sir, am I audible?
Very
yes.
Sir, I had a question that is hybridization harmful?
Sorry, your voice sank. Say it again.
Sir, is hybridization harmful?
Not always. Sometimes, yes. For example, in the invasive species context, if a non-native species comes from outside and hybridizes with a native species, it can actually give rise to something that has a negative impact on native species and native ecosystems, right? So, for example, if something that has come from outside is changing the structure of native ecosystems, that would lead to problems. So in some situations, it is definitely a problem. But in some situations, if, for example, hybridization is occurring between native species, different native species, it is not a problem. In fact, it could be the starting point of the creation of a new species. If we think that more biodiversity is better, and more biodiversity means healthier and more stronger ecosystems, having more newer different species could be, in those situations, could be beneficial. So it is really context dependent. The context decides whether the process is beneficial or costly.
Thank you, sir. So I had another question that is
Go on.
sir, is there any necessity of hybridization?
I wouldn't characterize it as necessity, but if we think that uh, should a process be allowed to happen naturally, right? That's the first thing. So if hybridization and interspecies hybrids are occurring due to a natural process, I think it should be allowed to happen. Just because they are interspecies hybrids doesn't mean that they should not be given conservation. That's the first thing, right? Second thing, a lot of hybrids are also coming up because of human intervention. So just as we saw in the citrus family, lot of more and better varieties are happening due to human beings. Should it happen? Yes, why not? Especially if they're more nutritious, if they're more tasty. Yes, I think that is allowed and that should happen. Uh, any biological process, if long-term thought or long-term thought for implications or consequences is not given to it, can also lead to problems. So hybridization in certain contexts would also be costly. If, for example, um, a hybrid program of creating ligers and tigons and releasing them in nature leads to some sort of negative impact on existing species, existing ecosystems, then actually it is a problem. So short-term benefits and long-term costs both should be taken into consideration.
Thank you, sir.
Right. I think we're going to Rishak's and then Amaya's question. And then
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Okay, sir. Thank you for the session. And I had a doubt, like nowadays humans are like bringing up technologies that can modify genetic structures, etc. So,
Yeah.
like, is it possible to like manually modify these interspecies hybrids genetics such that they can become fertile?
Uh, Reproduction is a very is under a lot of evolutionary pressure. By that, what I mean is it is the first thing on which evolution acts. My sense is, although I'm not an expert in genetics and molecular biology, my sense is intervention at the genetic level to change reproductive prowess of a species would be difficult. It is a very, very time consuming, technology driven process, and that may have quite inadvertent impacts also. But is it possible in theory, in the context of having genetically modified organisms? I would say yes. But it would again change from species to species, context to context. There is no one answer to your question.
Okay, sir. And I had another question too. So, you mentioned that many of the interspecies are sterile and they can't reproduce. So, won't they
Yeah.
become a liability to the environment because they're consuming the resources of the environment, but it's not multiplying? So, then what's the point of conserving those species?
Actually, no biological process or no evolutionary process is happens with a point in mind, right? A very famous statement is evolution is blind, or we can extend it to biological process. Biology is blind; it has no intention. If something happens, it happens. If something doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. There is no intentionality behind it, motivation behind it. But yes, as something of value or disvalue to human society, we can think about it in that context. Quite often, interspecies hybrids are useful. For example, mules. Quite often, they are hardier, they are more resilient, as compared to either of the parents, donkeys or horses. So in many of the mountainous areas, you have mules as creatures that allow you to do a lot of work rather than just using donkeys or horses. So yes, if you think about their use to us, some of them could be very useful. If you think about what is their position in the nature, uh, that question actually doesn't exist.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Alok. Interesting questions. Ameya, your question, and then Shifa. And we'll be on time, I
Good
think.
day, sir. I want to start off by saying that I'm not in the biostream, so this session was quite interesting to know about. And my question is that does hybridization lead to genetical mutation and they're related by some sorts?
Mutation and hybridization are related, but are two different things. Okay, mutations are happening even within species, within an individual as well. In our day-to-day life, a lot of mutations are happening to our genome. They're also being taken care of by the genetic repair mechanism that our body has. So not every mutation would lead to creation of a new species, but over thousands or millennia, when slowly these one-off mutations start building up, they give rise to differences from the ancestral population or ancestral species. In that context, hybridization in some sense fastens the process. Mutation is a very slow process. Sometimes it can be fast, but quite often it is a slow process. Hybridization gives you differences right there in the next generation. So in that sense, they are related, but they're also distinct from each other.
Okay, sir, I have one more question. Is it
Yeah.
possible for two hybrids to mate? And if so, what would be the result?
The conventional understanding was that two different species cannot give rise to a fertile offspring. But there were exceptions for that, like lions and tigers could mate and give rise to a fertile offspring, right? Their offsprings, then the skeptics came and said the hybrid, the first generation of hybrids, will not be able to mate, right? And that also was kind of swept aside when they saw that ligers and tigons could also mate with each other, with their parents, give rise to the second generation of hybrids. They're called, so when a liger mates with a lion parent, it's called a liliger. Okay, and so it can go on. Of course, we don't know for how long because those experiments are time consuming. As you know, a lion's and tiger's lifespan and their reproductive cycle is quite long. I'm not sure if experiments have been done beyond the second generation. But yes, quite often interspecies hybrids are sterile, but there are exceptions to that rule. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Alok. Thank you, Alok. You know, answering these questions so peacefully and nicely. And someone said who had not studied biology, I think the session is designed like that. It is not designed for somebody who's studying biology. All the four sessions are designed. And I think we have come to the end of all questions. Or Rishak, do you have a question now? And Shifa? Or did we just answer Shifa's question? Slightly confused.
Yes. Hello, sir. I'm Shifa
Yeah.
from Mumbai, and my question is: so it is possible to make artificial hybrid in lab? No, it is possible in future.
It is definitely possible. Lot of interspecies hybrid programs, either accidentally or by design, they happen in zoos, in captive breeding. What is their viability in nature needs to be tested. So if you make the mates available to each other, the interbreeding will happen. That might not happen in nature by itself, right? So the breeding of different species with each other is the first hurdle. When such an interspecies hybrid comes up in nature, it has to survive, it has to fend for itself, it has to find a mate for itself, it has to protect its progeny, basically everything that a real species does, right? So if it is able to achieve that in nature, it will survive. Otherwise, its presence will be confined to places where humans will have to help them to survive.
And so one more thing, if it survives and if they are maybe if they are causing a problem to humans, so we need to think about the solution also for that. Maybe
Absolutely. So creation of hybrids is probably a problematic thing. It is happening because as human societies, we also get attracted to things that are rare, that are charismatic, that do not happen in nature by itself. We are drawn to such things. But at the same time, if hybridization is happening in nature, I think there is a place for that. It should be allowed to happen. Whether we should be ourselves creating new hybrids or not, and what are their impacts on the existing ecosystem, existing species, that should be a topic of study as a long-term study. It should not be just, it should not be done in a few months or a year's time to conclude that hybrids are good.
thank you, sir.
Thanks, Alok. You're not sounding alarmist. You're giving a much more softer tone to hybridization. Yes. So last question for the day. I think we have kind of exceeded the time, but when questions come from students, we can't. We just keep going. So there's one more. Then two. Then Sujit, and then Abhinav, and then we end the session.
Yes, sir. Namaste, sir. Sir, my question is genetic modification or hybridization a better option? So you told hybridization is sometimes harmful in some cases. So is there any negative impacts for genetic modification?
Okay, I'm going to answer it, and this is an opinion. It's not an evidence-based answer. So you must take it with a pinch of salt. As an ecologist, my opinion about genetically modified organisms is, as Rajgopal said, often alarmist. Only because we do not know enough about the long-term impacts of GM organisms. All right. Um, why are long-term studies not happening? One, because the benefits and the problems of not having those benefits are quite large. For example, having a BT cotton, the process was fastened because we did not have the productivity of our farms was going down, especially of the cotton production, right? But also because much of this process is driven by capital, it's driven by economies, it's driven by companies, right? Quite often, if you have a hold of a technology and a successful technology in the short term, as a person or a company who has put a lot of money into it, you might not be interested to carry a long-term study around it. But governments must. And in the case of GM organisms, these long-term studies haven't happened. So we do not know what is the, and by long-term, we mean that at least on one generation, which means at least 10 to 20-year long studies. If these studies haven't happened, we do not know what are the long-term impacts of these studies. Hybridization is slightly different. Hybridization happens naturally. See, GM, genetically modified organisms, means that you're inserting gene of a very, very distant species into another species. This will not happen naturally. There are natural barriers which do not allow this to happen. But by human interventions, we are making this happen. So it is a very, very new thing in the planetary history. This has never happened before, the genetically modified part. Hybridization has been happening naturally, and there is no drastic change as such from the first generation to the next generation. So I think the alarm, the problem with hybridization are much, much lesser as compared to the genetically modified process. Now, of course, even if it is a slow process, even if it is a naturally occurring process, it can be problematic. So its impacts need to be studied. That definitely needs to happen.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Abhinav, what's your question?
Yes, sir. Namaste, sir. I am Abhinav from Hyderabad. So my question was that, let's say lion and tiger, when you have when you mix them with genes, you get liger, right? So do their natural qualities get heightened or do they decrease, or what is going on with their qualities?
Depends actually. So for example, liger, which is a lion male lion and a female tiger, it is bigger, taller than both of its parents. Whereas a tigon, which is a male tiger and female lion, it is dwarf. It is dwarf as compared to both its parents. So we really don't know what is happening at the genetic level, at the chromosomal level, how chromosomes and genes of different species are interacting with each other. But we have a broad understanding about the most commonly studied species. So, for example, in liger and tigons, there are very, very different directions they take in terms of development. Ligers are taller and bigger than both their parents, tigons and smaller and dwarfer than both their parents.
Thank you, sir.
Right. I think there's one more, and we should then last question for the day. I've been saying last. Atika, your question.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. I am Atika Sheikh from Madhya Pradesh. Sir, my question is: let's we make mad a man-made hybrid, but it's behave like a natural hybrid or not?
Quite often the behaviors, so definitely there are differences at the genetic and the chromosomal level, but that reflects in their outwardly characters also. So as you must have studied in biology at the school level, the morphology and the behavior is quite heavily dependent on what genes we carry, what is our genetic makeup. So yes, changes because of hybridization at the genetic and chromosomal level within the body has its impact on the outside body variables also. So the hybrids, they look different, they behave different. Quite often, their food habits are different. Their behaviors around their mates are different. Their longevity, lifespan is different. There are quite a few differences. So yeah, they are quite often very different from either of the parents. If you remember the slide that I had shown in the citrus family thing, you would find that lime is created by parents, or lemons are created by parents which look completely different from the lemon or the lime. So the outwardly appearance and the taste and the behavior of the hybrid is quite often very different.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Right. I think that brings us to the end of what I call a wonderful session. When I walked in, it's a personal reflection. I was not sure what to expect. Thank you, Achyut and Alok. Uh, I know you teach at a university level, but I also now know that you can speak to school students as well. Well, that was very, very nice. Both the sessions, not because we are colleagues. And thanks to the students for making this happen. I'm so glad so many of you took time on a hot summer morning to listen to us. And if you are, I think the last speaker, the person who asked the question, if you are in and around Bhopal, make a visit to the campus. The Azim Prem University Bhopal campus is always open if you want to come here, meet some of the faculty members, see the labs, right? And we finished 4 sessions in the summer workshop. There are 5 more remaining the next 2 days. And tomorrow we look at environmental, we're looking at history, but we're going to look at environmental history and see how do we really understand it. See the relationship. We spoke about ecology, biodiversity, hybrid species. Tomorrow it's history, but environmental history. And then the last session on that's on Friday, we're going to talk about farm to the folk. It's again environment. We're talking about genetically modified crops. And then there's a session also on the budgets. And that's on Friday. On that note, thanks again to my colleagues, Sadaf, others who worked behind the scenes to make this happen. And I'm sure many of you would join tomorrow. Shouldn't matter what you're studying in 11th and 12th. Either you're in the science, I mean, there's no for Azim Premji University, I mean, science is important, social science is important, humanities is much more important, right? So it doesn't matter what you're studying. If you'd like to share the Zoom link for registering with your friends, kindly do that. And more the merrier. Okay, on that note, have a wonderful day ahead. And that's short break from us until we see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye.